Good afternoon. My name is Paul Reist. On behalf of the Oral History Program of the GSB Library, I'd like to welcome you to today's event, An Evening with Five Deans. I wish to thank our panelists for this extraordinary opportunity, and a special thanks to Dean Saloner for moderating the panel. Our panelists probably need no introduction. Nevertheless, they are, starting closest to me, A. Michael Spence, Arjay Miller, our current Dean, Garth Saloner, Robert Jaedicke, and Robert Joss. This is an historic moment. Never before have five deans of the business school been assembled together on one stage. So we're looking forward to a really great hour. And now, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.
Well, it's a real honor to be here this evening. I'm not sure that it's possible to moderate this crowd, but I'll give it my best shot. It's of course a tremendous honor to be up here with the four of them. Anybody who is fortunate to be the dean of this institution stands on the shoulders of all of one's predecessors, and to have four such distinguished predecessors with us this evening is really a remarkable opportunity, and I feel so honored to be here with them. The GSB today, I think, is in incredibly good shape. We're sitting here in this fabulous auditorium, the CEMEX auditorium, in our still relatively new Night Management Center. We have embedded in it a new curriculum that we put in place 6 years ago. We are the most selective business school for MBA students, taking still fewer than 400 a year out of the roughly 6,500 to 7,500 who apply. And we've really transformed ourselves into a school that aspires to admit a relatively small number of incredibly high potential individuals, and then give them the opportunity in a 2-year, in the case of the MBA, or a 1-year in the case of the Sloan program, highly immersive, transformational experience that helps them become change agents that can take on the biggest challenges in the world, because we all know that the world has very significant changes in a whole variety of fields, and we aspire to educate those leaders who can go out and really tackle these big challenges. And so the question I'd like to really start with this evening is, how did we get here? Right? We look around, we kind of know where we are, and this is part of an oral history project. And so I thought, let's tell the story a little bit, because we have here on the stage the people who made that history. And so I'm going to start, Arjay, with you. And what I'm going to ask each of the deans chronologically to do is tell us a little bit about what you found when you came here and what you try to do, and then your own assessment of what you left when you handed the reins over. And we'll go around the group, and in that way we'll tell the story over the decades.
Thank you, Garth. I'm glad to be here this afternoon. As a matter of fact, I'm glad just to be alive. Most people born in 1916 are dead. When I agreed to take this job, we had full agreement that there would be a public management program added, and that all the students, or for all the students in the school, the curriculum would be expanded. Would be expanded. When I arrived on, I understood that there would be an increase in cost because of this. When you hire professors like Alan Enthoven and Harry Rowan and George Schultz, you know it's going to cost something, but I was prepared to take on the added cost of that undertaking. When I arrived on campus, I was shocked because I learned that the new president, Ken Pitzer, had set a rule that the business school could not spend any more than a fixed dollar amount, believe it or not. I had received a grant from the Ford Foundation to teach students from the School of Education something about management. We spent the money on the course, developed it, got the check from the Ford Foundation, which went over to Central Administration, and Ken Pitzer pocketed it. We didn't get a dime of it. I insisted on getting a meeting with him to try to get him to change the rule, but he wouldn't talk to me for the first 6 months I was on campus. So I went over his head to the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Stanford at that time, Palmer Fuller, and told him if I didn't get the rule changed, I would resign. He was sympathetic to how I was being mistreated, please ask me to stay on and be patient, and that other people were unhappy with Pitzer. I got the idea that Pitzer was going to be fired. He was fired on August 1. Dick Lyman came in, and in 8 days, I had a 5-year written contract that any money I raised above $500,000 could be kept. Bay Manning was the dean of the business school here at Stanford at that time, and he advised me that if we increased the academic freedom of the school, we would get even more freedom. So we made that a #1 priority. In those days, the deans of all the business schools in the U.S. voted, and in 5 years, they voted us #1. I think our financial independence and additional freedom has served the business school very well over these years, Garth, and that formula is still in place. You asked some other question, but I don't want to talk too long about what contributed to good times we had, but turn it over back to you. I think that's how I got started here. It was a little rough, but it turned out okay.
Well, thank you, Arjay. And of course, the formula basis that you established with the university, which has allowed us to keep the money that our alumni have wanted to give for the specific purpose of supporting the business school, has served us incredibly well over the decades, and we owe that to you. And so from that on to you, Bob. What did you find, and what did you really hope to do during your tenure?
Let me pick up in the 60s, because I was Arjay's associate dean, and that he was really my mentor. It was I guess the other piece of background you sort of have to cover is that if you looked at the industry and you said sort of how does business education stack up, and let's say that well, let's say the 50s and the 60s, early 60s. It was, and keep in mind that the Ford Foundation and our own Jim Howell and Aaron Gordon, an economist up at the University of California, sort of did a landmark study on the status of business education. And so there was a blueprint that was sort of beginning to emerge, but the idea was we needed to upgrade the academics of the program and the kind of education that led to an MBA, that led to all of the professional programs. And that didn't come just from us. I mean, that was sort of the status of the industry, I guess, as viewed by, two economists. But it was a very good study. And there were others that sort of corroborated that. So, and one of the things that they suggested would improve would be to pull into the business school disciplines that in those days were a little bit foreign to the business school, like economics, behavioral science, operations research. Today you'd say political economy, but whatever the version was of political economy in those days. And that sort of began, I think it's fair to say, in the Arbuckle career. And all of us up here should be very quick to tell you that you never start with something that's blank. we all build on the shoulders of those who came before us. So, it's kind of a tragedy today in some sense, I think, that you can't hear from Arbuckle and J.U. Jackson brought us through the Depression in World War II. That was no small feat. And he was dean for 25 years. So, we started with a school that had high quality even in those days, and the idea was, how do you improve it? How do you improve it? How do you move it along to where it is today? To infuse the disciplines in the business school, then you had to help them try to figure out, how do you bring your discipline to bear on the professional programs, which was to say, managerial leadership? And it wasn't obvious, but there were some guidelines that you could begin with. Well, I think in the school as I knew it, and sort of in Arjay's era is when it kind of began. And this, I don't know, maybe sounds a little corny today, but somehow there emerged a name that said, we called it balanced excellence. What it really meant was, we want to do as a single faculty, not have specialists so that some did one thing and some did another, but as a faculty, we want to do outstanding research, but we also want to do an outstanding job of teaching, formulating and teaching the professional programs. And to do it as a single faculty, that's like saying you want to do the R&D and the production and the sales all in the same group. That is not an easy model. And, but we felt that was the best way to do things like bring the disciplines to bear on managerial education, leadership and management. We also felt that any of the professional programs needed to be rooted in strong academic research. And you have to keep in mind, research is sort of the only activity that that faculty engage in that builds their intellectual capital. Practically everything else we do, you're living off your capital. Well, we started that model, and we made it work. But of all the things that are good in almost any academic university, when you say, how does it start? It's the faculty and the students who make it happen. The deans can try to help formulate the direction. Arjay was great, like Ernie was, at providing resources, so that one of the things that struck me when I came here was I never heard the words, I can't, or we can't. We heard the words like, well, let's see what we have to do it. And so good ideas were implemented. But where you say, where did the good ideas come from and how did they implement it? You've got to have a first-class faculty, very deep in their disciplines, who wanted to take on managerial problems. They wanted to lead. That's something your faculty was noted for from the very beginning, is leading the changes that are going to occur. But there's only so many hours in a day. Research and teaching are very different activities in some sense. And it's like, I'm sure the faculty felt we're living in two worlds. We need about a 28 or a 30-hour day to get all this done. But it's the same on the students. You have to have first-class students who want to learn in that kind of an environment. And that's always been the characteristic. So the idea was strong academic programs, professional programs resting on outstanding research, outstanding scholarship. And the other thing was, if you could link those two together, the courses would keep up they would even lead the changing that were taking place in the world. And you can see this today. I still read, with just one last comment, I still read the annual report very carefully. Well, if you look at the annual report, for example, for 2012, you find something like about 60 publications. But you also find 25 new courses. And I bet that if you looked at the change from one year to the next in the elective structure, you'd probably find 20-25% new material in those courses as well. And so you say, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the academic, from the research base. And the faculty and the students are the ones that make that happen, and you have to have that interchange. And of course, you ought to mention the PhD program. There is no question that the PhD program in this school is an outstanding program, and it's got to rest on a research base. It's got to be linked to a research base. But you got the faculty and students to thank for making this happen, and I guess it's very gratifying, I'm sure it is to Arjay, it is to me, that they're still doing it. That they're still doing it. And all you have to do is look at the program today, and if anything, you probably have more political economy, you got more of the disciplines reflecting themselves. I've spoken too long.
No, and I'm going to ask you a follow-on before I turn to Mike, because one of the things that fascinates me, I mean, it is a challenge even today to hire and maintain the quality of faculty that we do. And that's been an enduring challenge, I think, for all of us. And I wonder what it was like to try to convince a discipline-based set of scholars to come to what was really a new adventure in those days, because that was not an established model.
How do we get the faculty?
How did you get the faculty to?
Well, I think we did two things. One was we were able to convince some senior scholars who came here that were representative of disciplines really that were new to the business school. I came here as a faculty member in 1961, I guess, and I was an old accountant. But who were the others? Well, Ezra Solomon, Alan Mann, Al Hastorf, who came as the chairman of the psychology department at Dartmouth, Fred Tong was a computer scientist from Carnegie Mellon. I was about the only, he said, well, can you recognize somebody who's familiar with a business school? I was probably the only one that grew up in the business school. And that continued. They got, and the people that came here then, and again, if you hadn't had, the faculty does the recruiting, so the faculty had to help convince those that did come, that were sort of at the senior level, that A, we needed them, B, they were relevant, C, they had to learn how their discipline could help improve management. But then the next phase was, and that was really the scary one, was you go out and you try to find young, beginning, discipline-based, research-based young people. And you bring them in and you help them mature, you help them grow, you help them develop. And there's any number of those people around today that have been here for a number of years. And that's scary, because one thing the faculty had to do, and boy, and I got to tell you this, but I didn't invent it. I just tried to push it along, is you had a group that were here that did the recruiting, and they were trying to find people who were better than they were. Now, you got to stop and think for a moment, what does that mean? It means that maybe I ought to become a dean because I'm not going to survive in this atmosphere. No, that sounds funny, but boy, it's real. I mean, And, but the faculty had to do that, and they were willing, and what it meant was, if you appoint people who are smarter than you are, it probably also means they come here with a different set of talents. They're different than you are. And you sort of have to step back and say, how many organizations do you know that are willing to do that? That still goes on today, yeah. I'm sure.
Well, I think it's a remarkable thing.
Pardon me?
I think it's a remarkable thing that you did.
And well, I didn't do it.
Well, I mean, but that was done at that time at the school. You know, I don't know how widely appreciated it is, but really, at that time, the Stanford Graduate School of Business defined the model for the modern business school, yeah. And that was the model, and it is a model that has endured to today, yeah. And has really created the model for the industry.
I say we had a leadership position in the industry. Arjay said it. Keep in mind that in 1975. This school celebrated its 50th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And by the time the 50th anniversary, this is only 10, 12 years after sort of Ernie post-war sort of started, it kind of started during his era. It was like 15 years. The industry was saying, you're the best school in the world. Now, I don't think anybody, got too big-headed about that, but it was very, very gratifying to say the outside industry recognizes the leadership of this school.
Yeah, incredible. So, Mike, you and I came together.
We did.
We came back, both of us, in different forms. And so, tell us a little bit about, the decade of the 90s.
Well, you've already heard the foundation that we were standing on by that point, well established, and it won, basically, competitively in the industry. I think the people who built it, including Bob and Arjay and Ernie, and Jim Howell and Jim Van Horn and a whole group of people, showed a lot of imagination and also courage. I mean, this is a model that sounds great now, but it wasn't obvious at the time it would work. And I have to say, I wouldn't be here. I mean, I was an academic. If that hadn't been the model, I wouldn't have been back at Stanford in this wonderful job. Let me, however, say, like any great model, there are stresses and strains that come. And at the end of Bob's time, and certainly moving into the 90s, there started to be questioning of this model. The symbol of it, of course, was the Business Week survey that, did an awful lot of good things for their sales of magazines, but kind of put us into a bit of a tailspin and slightly on the defensive. And I think what they were saying is something in the balance, was out of whack. Now, part of it was nuts. I mean, when I got here, a well-known alum of the school came in to see me and said, the graduates of this school aren't aggressive enough. They don't go kill people, We hire Harvard types. And I said, well, I kind of like them. And he said, well, they just organize the social functions. And then but I actually think that part of the culture of the school that was built along with this sort of cohesiveness has turned out to be another great strength. A more worrying set of phone calls came in that sounded more or less, remember this is when Japan was, fairly far along and we thought eating our lunch. It seems like ancient history now. I got phone calls saying, the whole MBA program ought to be scrapped and replaced with total quality management programs. And I thought, thank you very much. Put down the phone. But we did, in some sense, feel we had to respond to this. And one of the things that I wanted to add in this kind of history is one of the things we tried, Garth was involved in this, Irv Grossbeck, Chuck Holloway, many, many people. We evolved a model that Bob Joss carried on that involved centers. It involved expanding the curriculum. It involved bringing very talented people from the financial side, from business practitioners, if you like, to come and teach together, with our own faculty. Garth has done this. Robert Bergelman did it with Andy Grove. And so we adapted the model, I think, in a way that was consistent with the underlying ideals. I mean, I always said teaching executive education, teaching with Andy Grove if you ever got the chance, or more recently with Pete Wendell, and that you discover things that could get transformed into your research agenda. It was intellectually enriching in the long run. And so I think that has turned out over a period of a couple of decades to be a really important addition to the way the school operates, building on that model and the foundation. The other thing I wanted to say, I was sitting at home the other night in Milan. Italy is a bit of a wreck right now. I think you should all take cover. Thinking about what Arjay was doing with the public management program, which is the first thing he mentioned. When you look around the world, it's astonishing how much is dependent on political and policy reactions or their absence. And I remember thinking, could I possibly have had the foresight to see that politics and political economy were going to become an increasingly important part of our life? And I concluded the answer was no, that Arjay was probably unique in that respect. But it really is true. The other thing we started, and then it really gained momentum under Bob Jaws, is, we're living in a world in which the developing countries that account for 85% of the world's population are now 50% of the global economy. And business people and we and our own faculty were saying, we've got to react to this. And so we piled on an additional challenge, which is somehow we have to sort of build into our research agenda and the curriculum a way to keep track of this rapidly evolving world that's having a larger and larger impact on us. Remember, in the 1960s, what went on in the developing world, occasionally caused a fit on the balance sheet of, Citibank, but for the most part was largely irrelevant. And we were a big, dominant economy, 40% of the global economy, and we operated in that world. That's a world now that we're continuing to have to adapt to. And so you overlay on it the need to have a research agenda with a discipline base and work together to build imaginative, creative curriculum for a bunch of people who want to be sort of managers and leaders in NGOs and business and finance and so on. And then somehow you've got to find a way, and I know Garth still wrestles with this, to sort of keep your finger on the pulse of an enormously broad array of sort of economic activity. The last thing I'll say is it's very important to pick the time you arrive and the time you depart. So I learned my lesson. I showed up in 1990, a recession that they concocted in the East Coast of the United States was rolling west with great speed, unbeknownst to many people out here. And it hit with a storm. And then the university got in a fairly large amount of trouble with the federal government over the sponsored research, sort of overhead cost recovery. So some of you will remember. And so that was fun. And there'd been an earthquake in 1989. So Paul Johnson and many others were trying to keep the old school from falling down. And I thought, this is a great way to start. And somewhere along the way, Don Kennedy stepped aside and so on. Well, anyway, it got a lot better. And by the time I stepped down, we had the internet bubble running, at high speed. It was marvelous. I mean, we were awash in cash. And I thought to myself, this isn't going to last, and I better get out of the way so that Bob Joss could take over when the bubble bursts. I didn't know it was going to be Bob, but... And so I made up this excuse that I'd been a dean for 15 years, including 9 here, and that my successor ought to preside over the 75th anniversary of the school. I declared complete victory. and turned it over to a world in which we had a big downturn economically followed by 9/11. And over to you, Bob.
Well, before we go there, Mike, I'm reminded by seeing Carol Dressler in the audience that
Right.
we have spoken about the MBA program. We've referenced the Sloan program, and Bob spoke about the PhD program, but we've not said anything about executive education, which has been a very important part of the school and an increasingly important part of the school. And I remember you and Carol and Jeff Pfeffer and some others wrestling with how to approach that within the model that's been described. If you could say just a couple of words about that.
Well, and again, I don't mean this to be to chip away at the model, but Jim Howell, in my first or second year as dean, came in and said, Mike, we're carrying executive education on the shoulders of about 5 or 6 older faculty. So the theory that we have a school that's engaging with experienced executives broadly as a faculty is not, in fact, the case. And he said this is very vulnerable, and he actually led a faculty group to sort of study this question. And we then experimented with ways to bring younger people in a non-threatening way. I mean, the MBA is already relatively scary for a newly minted PhD in pick your discipline. But an executive program is truly scary. And the way we approached that, and Garth, you and I were together doing this, we had to prepare both sides. We had to help the junior faculty go in there, and we had to give them an assignment where they were operating with their comparative advantage, and we had to prepare the listeners, you know, the participants in the program, and say, look, the majority of what you're going to get is the kind of thing you expected when you came here, but you're going to be exposed to some young people who aren't going to be able to speak your language in toto as an experienced executive, but you're going to hear some pretty amazingly interesting ideas from these young people. And that, after some experimentation, I think, you know, has produced a situation in which the executive programs have broader faculty participation. We probably ought to give Carol a second opinion on this.
Well, and they're really thriving now. I mean, they got a big boost back then. And so, Bob, now over to you.
Well, that's a great setup by Mike. 1999, if you can remember, was NASDAQ 5000 and CNBC on the lawn interviewing our students out here. It was nirvana. And more seriously, it was a great school. I mean, we had this foundation, started with Ernie to Arjay to Bob to Mike. Great students, great faculty, students who were in both MBA, PhD, executive students, an international reputation. You know, so what do you do for an encore? But I think like you know, all great institutions, you know, the real secret is, can you keep moving it forward? Can you keep challenging? As John Gardner used to say, you've got to renew yourself. And I always figure the role of a leader is to see if you can change it for the better and get people excited about changing it for the better. And the secret, I think, for us at my time was engagement, you know, to sit down with faculty, who always had ideas about how it could be better, staff, students, alumni, recruiters, the university. And I found as I got more engagement going, a lot of people had ideas about how it could be better and perhaps how it could be more balanced. You know, you're always trying to keep things in balance. It may be great for students, but faculty morale was down. Or it may be great for faculty, but staff morale is down. So you're trying to keep everybody in a plane where they think, wow, I'm part of a great school and I'm part of helping it to be great. So one thing led to another, and I think that process of engagement, of talking to a lot of people about simply answering that question, you know, how can we make a great school even better? We began to hit on 3 big themes, you know, that we called the 3 C's, so I could remember them every time I went out to talk. The first C was curriculum, that we thought we needed a new curriculum. to really engage students, one that was more global, one that was more tailored to individual differences, one that was more about leadership and communication. And a faculty group headed by our next dean, Garth, really put forward an astonishing and exciting and challenging new curriculum that we thought would bring the culture much farther along than it was. So that was one thing. Then I thought a new collaboration with Stanford. We were beginning to enter an era where Stanford was doing so many exciting things, tackling big challenges, big problems, human health, the environment, international peace and development. And so we just thought there were ways in which we as a school could be more engaged with the university and vice versa. Our students with other graduate students, our faculty with graduate students who are going to become future faculty members and or participants in other institutions. So that collaboration was the second C. And the combination of that led me to something I never expected to even worry about, which was a new campus. Because when I came, I inherited really some great facilities. Mike had been successful in getting the Schwab Center across the street built. That was a transforming investment in the school. He had the new Knight building that was, hooked onto the Littlefield Center. And so we thought, no, we're okay for facilities, but increasingly we just thought for that curriculum and that collaboration, the kind of infrastructure we need to enable all of this to really come to life and really sing was a new campus. And so that curriculum, collaboration, campus, of course, it did lead to a fourth C I didn't talk much about, which was cash. And again, though, you stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before. I mean, Mike had done a fabulous job of cultivating some very supportive alums, people like Phil Knight, like Bob Bass, like Chuck Schwab, and who continued to be excited about the school. And we could add to that a whole team of people who had found Stanford to be transformative in their lives, and they wanted to make that possible for others. And, it's fantastic what we have today, but it gets better, and I think as long as we continue to try to change it for the better, then that's what a dean's all about. So you try to pass that baton to the last person. Arjay followed Ernie. Ernie said, 10 years, you got to repot. That's enough time. Arjay said 10 years, that's enough time. Bob said that. Mike said 9. I don't know. He trumped up this 9-year thing, but I said 10 years. That's enough time. And over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Mike made the comment that it's all about timing, and I'm the one up here that got that right. So you want to become dean when you're putting the finishing touches on a brand new 8-building Knight Management Center. When the curriculum is in place and really humming, when we're more than halfway through an incredible campaign that had as a goal 500 million, which I think at the time we launched it seemed out of reach, and ended up way surpassing that thanks to the incredible generosity of our alumni. So I want to say just a couple of things, and then I'm going to throw a few more questions to this group. One is that, as I listen to their recounting what they did over the decades, one of the things that really strikes me is that all of these elements that they describe are part of our DNA, right? They're very much who we still are today. So we rely on the formula model that you built. We still have in place the faculty hiring and development model that was put in place several decades ago, and which is the core strength of the school. Balanced excellence, we still talk about and practice. The integration of the tenure line faculty with great practitioners, often at the same time in the same classroom, right? Which really you gave the impetus to the collaboration with the university, the fact that we are part of an incredible university, walking distance to every school. This is something that virtually no other business school has. All of these elements which you defined your eras have become part of our DNA and have continued and are a great part of the strength of the school. The final thing I will say, and then I'll change subject here a little, is as I look out into the second row, I see Bob and Dottie King. Will you take a bow? So Bob and Dottie, as you know, about 18 months ago, gave an incredible $150 million gift to the business school and the university to help us launch a new institute that's focused on global poverty. It's called SEED, the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies. And I mention it because I have been asked as dean, if you talk about global poverty, the next words out of your mouth are usually not business school, right? And so what is a business school doing, taking on something not just of this magnitude, but seemingly this different from your heritage? And of course, for us, it's about entrepreneurship and about managers of growing enterprises in developing economies, both of which are things we know a lot about. But I think our willingness to take that on goes back to the roots in the public management program and the idea that we're educating not just functionaries which will take on specific functions in corporations, but real leaders who can take on the big challenges, and that's one of the challenges that they're taking on and represents another step, I think, in the evolution of the school. So I'd like you to reflect, and I'm not going to go in any order. You can take this in any order you'd like. Arjay, you wanted to jump in first?
I'd like to comment that one of the criticisms against the public management program is so very few people of our graduates went into public work after they graduated. Well, they couldn't. The salaries were too low after they paid all the costs here at Stanford. But I maintain that it was a very successful program to broaden their curriculum for a number of reasons. Yeah. First of all, our students, men and women that go into business, I think, make more successful businessmen because of the broader training that they've had here at Stanford. If something pops up on the need for air and water cleaning and safety or rising wages, they know what the other world is about, and they'll respond to it more successfully. So next, business is the most powerful force in our society. And businessmen, well-educated, would support needed social legislation instead of opposing it. I believe that 25 years from now, this generation will be severely criticized for not doing more in the area of climate control. Also, I believe that our graduates, with the broader base they get from these new disciplines and the other things you've been hearing about up here, will be more willing to participate in community life. They'll go on school boards, part-time political appointments. And then later on, after kids are through college and they've got secure financial arrangements, they may accept full-time political appointments. They might even run for office and take other nonprofit jobs. Some of them might even turn to philanthropists. We've heard here from Bob King and his wife, and Phil Knight, and Bob Bass, so that can't be all that bad. And then lastly, I think our graduates will lead a more satisfied life because they will have a broader viewpoint of what the world is about. The fact that they've made some contribution other than in business will make them feel like they've had a part in making this world a better place in which to live. A magazine man once said that described Stanford as the business school with the conscience. I like that. I think that is an advantage that we can play on in the years ahead.
Yeah. So maybe we can follow up on that, Bob, because one of the things that you and Mike spoke about, the expansion of the centers while you were dean, and one of the centers that you launched was the Center for Social Innovation. So would you talk a little bit about that and the connection of that to this work around public management?
Well, I think the Center for Social Innovation really built on Arjay's vision for public management. It was a broader vision to pretty much echo what he just described, that it's not just about going into public service or managing public enterprises. That's important. Can we get better management in nonprofit, NGO, and public enterprises? But can we get a different kind of management in our for-profit enterprises, and a way of thinking and a way of approaching problems? I was here before Arjay when Lee Bach was a great teacher, and I was privileged to have him for class. And he had a class on government and society and business, and he'd always end every class with, what's the role of business in this? We'd have some big public problem. He'd say, well, what's the role of business? And he pushed us hard. We need to do that more again. We need to, things come back. And I think our feeling with the Center for Social Innovation was, well, what's the role of business? How can business make this better? I mean, business is doing so well, enjoying so many advantages from globalization, as Mike says, that it has to be feeling a sense of responsibility for these much, much bigger problems that the university has a capacity to tackle.
So I wonder if we can give the audience a little bit of insight into what it's like to sit in the chairs that each of you have sat in. And in particular, what would you say was the biggest challenge, if you were to pick one, the single biggest challenge that you faced as dean? And if you look back, and I know it's hard to focus on one thing, what would you say was your single biggest
challenge?
Well, challenge and then accomplishment. Would you take both of those, Bob?
Well, when I was dean, certainly one of the biggest challenges was, this is in the 80s, technology was just exploding. And, the personal computer sort of came out in force in 81 or 82, that's not very long ago. And you can imagine how does that affect the school, and how should we exploit it? It was clearly a very powerful force. But you had to sort of figure out things like, what do you do about the library? You keep buying books, or what do you do about, you've got all this computing technology out there, but it didn't talk to one another. And so you wanted to embed it in the teaching programs, but you can't get faculty due to course development to do that if they don't know what the machinery is. And you couldn't just say to students, bring your own computer. They wouldn't, how would they communicate? And it was almost like, that's one reason I thought in 1990 it was a pretty good time to get out, Michael, because technology, I'm sure, it became sort of the single biggest number in the budget. And ours was only, 10, 12 million. Yours was 180 million, yeah. But that was part of it. How do you deal with that? And, the school, to its credit, said the only way to do it if we're going to build it into the teaching programs is you can bring whatever computer you want, but there'll be a computer here that the faculty can count on. And so we almost created a second library, like so sort of a computer services. The other thing was globalization, which you guys have made. You got more political economy in this school now than we ever dreamed, I think, you'd have back in the 80s. And in business and changing environment, what had sort of changed, you had to understand the political process, so we go out and hire political scientists. We became like, especially under the 90s and into the 2000s, you're almost like a mini university. Mm-hmm. So you draw much better on the university as well as the Silicon Valley community. Well, there's something like 50, 60 lecturers on this faculty.
That's right.
Most of them drawn from the community. You've got courtesy appointments that run both ways that probably number in the 30s or 40s. 30, 40 of our people who hold courtesy appointments and other disciplinary departments and the same coming in. You've got to be a respected member of the academic community in order to make that happen. But I think it was either sort of the technology and the globalization that were, those were the biggest issues that I think, or at least they were two very big issues.
And if you were to point to a single accomplishment from your deanship that you're proud of?
You know,
Easy-
deans don't accomplish that.
That's right.
Yeah, you're in the right place at the right time. This is an organization. Arjay once told me that, I said, Arjay, you're the expert on this. What are the characteristics of an outstanding CEO leader? You remember what you told me? Said the most important thing is, huh?
The dogs have to eat the dog food.
No, it wasn't that. You told me the most important thing is that the CEO has to love the organization. That all sets a lot of mistakes, you know, because, and then you can name people that were, you thought maybe not all that good in a technical sense, but they loved the organization, they were just outstanding. That's the way I feel about this institution. And it's the way everybody feels about the institution. Think what would happen if we held this event and there was nobody out there. You know, and that doesn't happen. You know, all of you people love the organization just as much as we do. That's the that's the thing that I remember the most.
The main job of a dean is to create an environment so the professors could go to work successfully. My big challenge was something I failed in. I thought that criteria for admission to the school was terribly important, and I tried to get some professor interested in that subject, but failed during the 10 years. You may not remember this, Garth, but when you and I were having lunch with Jim Van Horn, I mentioned the subject, and a few days later, you came up with two professors that were interested in it, two great ones, Rajan and Otis. And a few days later, Jim Van Horn and I got with them, and they said they were willing, along with Derek Bolton, who's MBA Director of Admissions, to undertake a robust multi-year study on criteria for admissions, with over 15 students making an application, trying to pick the one that's going to be a leader in his later life. And leader in something more than just making money is a real challenge. They said that they would not only follow the ones that were successful, but also the ones that failed. Harvard turned down Warren Buffett. I'm sure that these gentlemen will turn out a great study that will be extremely useful and very important, and I'm waiting for the results.
Yeah, well, and we thank you for your help with Arjay. I think it's an incredibly important subject. Mike, your challenges.
Well, I've talked a bit about them. Let me talk about the experience. My predecessor at Harvard was a very funny, talented man named, a very skilled academic politician named Henry Rosofsky. And he was once asked, what's it like being dean? And he said, it's like being a dentist. You see somebody every half hour and inflict pain. So, you know, not every aspect of a job is fun. I mean, overall it's fun, but it's, you know, you got to see a lot of people, and some of them have fairly peculiar requests. I'll tell you the episode that I felt, and still do, feel the most badly. I mean, when you're a dean, you're ultimately responsible for a pretty wide range of functions, as you are in business. And this was the early stages of fairly, as Bob Jaedicke just described, a fairly rapid expansion of computer systems. And, you know, we weren't that good at it. And at one point, a backup failed badly. And we lost some PhD theses, or parts of them and whatnot. And we got a fair amount of it back. But if I had to pick one moment, if you like, in which I thought, gosh, I'd really rather have another job, That was probably it. The most rewarding part, I think, has already been described. It's working with staff and people. It's working with people you really respect. On the faculty, you know, the lecturers who came in and joined us, people of enormous accomplishment and commitment, and in Arjay's terms, broad commitment to the society and to doing some good. So that's the most rewarding part. And I'm like Bob Jaedicke, I don't have a clue. I think it's sort of somebody else's job to figure out if anything useful kind of got done on the way through.
All right, Bob, I'm learning. Let's focus just on the challenges, shall we?
You know, for me, I think by far the biggest challenge is this balancing act among the various constituencies that make up an academic institution. It's really much more challenging than it is in business. You know, you've got students, you've got faculty, you've got staff, you've got alumni, you've got recruiters, you have the university. And it's not going to be a great school unless all of those constituents feel they have a part in that and they understand each other's role and they feel good about it. So I think it's much more complicated than it is in business, and getting that balancing act right and bringing everybody along and everybody excited and respecting each other's role, for me, was the biggest challenge. The thing I feel the best about, I feel great about the campus. I'm proud of the campus, but I feel the best about the relationship between our school and the university. For me, that, you know, when my search committee, and I see one member out there, Jim, said, you know, Bob, just keep the university off our back. There was, I mean, I'm probably overstating that, but, you know, I grew up in a life where I was a group executive, and you wanted to keep headquarters away, and you wanted to keep the CEO kind of not sure what was going on in your line of business. But I also had been a CEO for 6 years, and I wondered, why aren't these group executives working better together, and how can we get them to think about the whole and make the whole better? And I just felt that we had a tremendous role to play with the university and vice versa to make it a great university. And I feel extremely good today about how respected our school is within Stanford and the role that our school, both students, faculty, everybody, is playing to make Stanford a better university. And to me, I'm the most proud of that. It wasn't something I did, but it was a cultural change that's in some ways much harder to bring about than a physical structure like building a campus.
Yeah, that's great. You know, we're almost coming up on time, but I have one more question which I'm going to pose to Mike Spence, because I think history will not be kind to us in retrospect if we close without a forward-looking question of the following kind. And the question, Mike, is this. So in 1999, Mike stepped down, and I thought, well, here's a real opportunity. I got hold of Mike and I said, now that you no longer have a day job, why don't you join me in teaching a course? Let's teach a course on electronic business. It was the height of the dot-com era. I said, we have no idea what it is. Maybe we'll learn something by teaching the course. And we did. We did. We learned quite a bit. And if I were to caricature the course, I don't know if you agree, but if you were to caricature the course, the way the course went is every week we brought in some business leaders from one industry after the other. And what they said to us was, they said, this internet thing is really interesting, but it's not going to affect our industry. You know, books, people are still going to have to go to the bookstore, and they're going to have to pick up the book, and they're going to have to feel it. Books are fine. Well, bookstores are dead. You know, travel agencies. Well, you're going to have to go to the, the way automobiles, newspaper content, one after the other. And that was basically what the course consisted of, right, as we went through. And conspicuously absent from that list was higher education, right? And yet we look out there today and we look at this revolution that is going on in online education. And Coursera, which is one of the companies that has spun out of Stanford, is faster to 2 million users than either Facebook or Twitter. So this is a revolution. I mean, this is no longer a shot across the bow. Do you have views on what do you think this holds for higher education and for business schools in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are major, major changes. I mean, first of all, in higher education in America, we're going to have to sort of get back in line, much like the healthcare sector in terms of costs. And I think one of the ways we're going to do that is to use the digital media that are continually being reinvented as tools. I think the hard part, the thing that where we are going to have to either experiment our way through and or use cutting-edge research from social scientists, people, you know, psychologists and sociologists who study these things, is to figure out what's the right mix. I mean, we know the interpersonal part isn't going to go away, so we have to. So it's not a clean model. It's not the kind of silly stuff we heard in the course. You know, one group comes in and says, you know, online retail will blow away the bricks and mortar, and the other people come and say, no, they're going to go, and neither one of them is true. You know, there's a lot of problems in the world where you don't know the answer in advance, even though journalists want you to tell them what the answer is, and you have to have a school like this that has the capacity to, and the will and the incentive to adapt and learn how to do it. So I think we can be a leader in that, but I don't have any doubt whatsoever that in multiple dimensions, this will be an important part of the way we teach and do research. Well, it already is with research, right? I mean, you know, you probably all know this, but I mean, Bob Zellick put the World Bank database. It's just massive. You know, it's a public resource now. You can go look up anything you want, essentially, about any country in the world or any collection of countries. So the democratization of access to information is an important component of the way we're going to teach and learn.
Yeah. And the message in that is that we have to continue to innovate and adapt, and we do stand on the shoulders of others, but future generations are relying on us to continue to reinvent on their behalf. And so I do want to stay on schedule. I could sit up here and chat to these folks all night. I have many more questions unanswered. It's such a pleasure, such a joy to sit here with you. I want to close with an observation that has already come through in many of the comments, that when you add it all up, in the end it's about the people. It's about the people who have love of this institution, who've come through it as students and been transformed by it and become the alumni who support us and enable us to do the things we do. It's about the incredibly talented faculty in this faculty model you've described, who take on a tremendous challenge of bringing their disciplines to bear and then developing into faculty who define and redefine fields and bring that knowledge to the students. It's about an incredibly dedicated staff across the school who work here because of the mission and because they share the love of the institution. And so, you know, all of these elements are the people who share the love of the GSB and therefore make the job that I have, I think, not just the best job in higher education, but one of the best jobs in the world. And so I want to ask you to join me in thanking my four esteemed deans for being here today. And I think, as usual, Arjay wanted the final word.
Right.
I'm a pretty hard grader, but I like to say I think GSB today has the best students, the best faculty, the best facilities, the best collaborations, the best alumni, and we're located right here in the heart of Silicon Valley. And under your leadership, this school become more and more known as the best business school in the world. Thank you, Garth, for all you're doing for us.
Thank you.
We're great for that.
Thank you all.
Good job.
Thank you.